Her body was too small for a rancher, but the rancher protected her anyway. Emotional Wild West love story. The small town of Willow Creek sat quietly under the wide blue sky of the Wild West. Wooden buildings lined the dusty road, and horses stood tied outside the general store. Most people in Willow Creek were ranchers, farmers, or travelers passing through the valley. Life there was not easy. The land was wide and beautiful, but it demanded hard work. Ranchers woke before sunrise and worked until the sun disappeared behind the hills. Because of that, people in Willow Creek believed one thing very strongly. Only the strongest could survive ranch life. One warm afternoon, a young woman walked slowly into town. She carried a small bag and wore a simple dress with a light brown coat. Her name was Clara Whitfield. Clara looked small compared to the tall ranchers who walked around town. Her hands were soft, and her steps were quiet. She did not look like someone who belonged on a ranch. As she passed by the general store, a few townspeople noticed her. "Is she looking for ranch work?" one man whispered. Another man shook his head. "She's too small for that kind of life." Clara heard some of the whispers, but she kept walking. She had heard words like that before. Still, she did not stop. She had come to Willow Creek for one reason. She needed work. Clara walked toward the largest ranch near the town. A wooden sign near the road read, "Cole Ranch." The ranch was known for its large fields and healthy horses. The owner, Ethan Cole, was one of the most respected ranchers in the valley. Clara took a small breath and walked toward the barn. Inside, several workers were busy moving supplies and brushing horses. The smell of hay filled the air. One of the workers noticed her standing near the door. "Can I help you?" he asked. Clara nodded politely. "I'm looking for work," she said softly. The worker looked surprised. He glanced at her small frame and raised his eyebrows. "Ranch work is not easy," he said carefully. "I understand," Clara replied. The worker looked unsure, but he pointed to a man standing near the far side of the barn. "You should talk to Mr. Cole." Clara thanked him and walked across the barn. Ethan Cole stood beside a tall brown horse, gently brushing its coat. He was a strong man in his early 30s with calm eyes and a quiet presence. People trusted him because he treated others fairly. When he noticed Clara walking toward him, he stopped brushing the horse. "Hello," he said kindly. "Can I help you?" Clara stood politely in front of him. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said. "I came to Willow Creek looking for work. I was hoping you might need help on the ranch." Ethan listened carefully. For a moment, he did not answer. Instead, he studied her face. Clara did look small compared to most ranch workers, but there was something in her eyes that caught his attention. She looked nervous, yes, but she also looked determined. "You've worked on a ranch before?" Ethan asked. "A little," Clara answered honestly. "My father owned a small farm. I helped take care of animals and fences." Ethan nodded slowly. At that moment, one of the ranch workers walked closer and quietly spoke. "Boss, ranch work might be too hard for her." Another worker nearby agreed. "It's long hours and heavy work." Clara looked down slightly, clearly used to hearing those doubts. But Ethan did not laugh. He did not dismiss her. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Why do you want to work here?" Clara looked up again. "Because I want to earn my place," she said quietly. "And because I'm not afraid of working hard." The barn became quiet. Ethan thought about her words. Many people came asking for work, but not everyone spoke with that kind of calm determination. After a moment, Ethan gave a small nod. "You can try working here," he said. Clara blinked in surprise. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "You'll start with small tasks around the ranch. Feeding animals, organizing supplies, helping with fences." The other workers looked at each other, surprised by his decision. But Ethan simply continued brushing the horse. "Everyone deserves a fair chance," he added calmly. Clara felt something warm in her chest. For the first time that day, she smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." Ethan gave a small nod. "Work starts early," he said, "before sunrise." Clara smiled again. "I'll be ready." As the sun slowly moved lower across the sky, Clara stepped outside the barn and looked across the wide open land of Cole Ranch. The field stretched far into the distance. The work would be difficult. The days would be long. And many people still believed she was too small to survive ranch life. But Clara Whitfield was not someone who gave up easily. The next morning in Willow Creek began long before the sun appeared. The sky was still dark when Clara Whitfield woke up inside the small room the ranch workers used. A cool breeze moved through the wooden window, and the sound of distant horses filled the quiet air. Clara sat up and looked outside. The ranch was peaceful at that hour. The land stretched far across the valley, covered with soft morning fog. Today would be her first real day of work at Coal Ranch. Clara quickly tied her hair back and put on her simple boots. She stepped outside just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Some of the workers were already awake. They moved around the barn, carrying tools and buckets. Most of them were strong men who had worked on ranches for years. When they saw Clara walking toward the barn, a few of them exchanged quiet looks. One worker whispered to another, "Let's see how long she lasts." Another shrugged, "Maybe 2 days." Clara heard them, but she stayed calm. She had learned something important while growing up on her father's small farm. Sometimes the best answer was not words. Sometimes the best answer was simply doing the work. Inside the barn, Ethan Cole was already there. He stood beside a large wooden table, checking a small notebook that listed the ranch tasks for the day. When he saw Clara enter, he nodded politely. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Clara replied. Ethan handed her a small bucket. "We'll start with feeding the horses," he explained. "After that, you can help organize the supply room." Clara nodded. "I can do that." Together with another worker, she walked toward the horse stalls. The horses lifted their heads when they saw the food buckets. Clara moved carefully, placing hay into each stall. At first, her movements were slow. She wanted to make sure she did everything correctly. The other worker watched her for a moment. "You don't have to be that careful," he said. "Just move faster." Clara smiled politely. "I like doing things properly," she answered. The worker shrugged and walked away. As the morning continued, Clara finished feeding the horses and moved to the supply room. The room was messy. Ropes, tools, and saddles were stacked in different corners. Clara looked around thoughtfully. Then she quietly began organizing everything. She placed the ropes in one area, stacked the tools neatly, and cleaned the dusty shelves. It took time, but when she finished, the room looked completely different. Everything was easy to find. Later that morning, Ethan stepped inside the supply room. He paused when he saw the shelves. "Did you organize all of this?" he asked. Clara nodded. "It was a little messy before," she said softly. Ethan looked around again. For a moment, he smiled slightly. "That will save us a lot of time," he said. Clara felt happy hearing that. The day continued with more small tasks. Clara helped repair a loose fence near the horse field. She carried water buckets and brushed the horses gently. While she worked, she noticed something others had not. One of the younger horses seemed nervous. It stood quietly in the corner of the field and refused to eat. Clara walked slowly toward it. She spoke in a soft voice and held out some hay. The horse hesitated at first, but after a moment, it stepped closer. Clara carefully brushed its neck and whispered gently to calm it. At that moment, Ethan was walking past the field. He stopped when he saw Clara with the horse. The animal looked much calmer than before. Ethan had noticed earlier that the horse seemed uneasy, but the ranch workers had been too busy to focus on it. Clara had noticed, and she had taken the time to help. Ethan watched quietly for a moment before continuing on his way. By the afternoon, the sun was warm above the ranch. The workers gathered near the barn to drink water and rest. One of them spoke quietly. "That girl works harder than I expected." Another nodded. "She doesn't complain either." Clara sat nearby, drinking water quietly. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She was simply doing her best. As the sun slowly began to set across the golden fields of Coal Ranch, the workers finished their tasks for the day. Ethan walked past the barn and saw Clara placing tools back into the supply room. Everything was still neat and organized. "You worked well today," he told her. Clara smiled gently. "Thank you." Ethan looked across the wide land of the ranch. Many people believed strength only meant lifting heavy things or working fast. But today, he had noticed something different. Clara worked with care, patience, and attention. Sometimes those qualities were just as valuable, maybe even more. As the sky turned orange and the evening breeze moved across the fields, Clara stood outside the barn and watched the sunset. It had only been her first day, but already something was beginning to change at Cole Ranch. The workers were starting to see her differently, and Ethan Cole was beginning to realize something important. Clara Whitfield might not look like a typical ranch worker, but she had a quiet strength that could not be easily seen. Several weeks passed at Cole Ranch, and Clara Whitfield slowly became part of the daily life there. Every morning she woke up before sunrise. She helped feed the horses, check the fences, and organize the tools. Her work was always quiet, but it was always done with care. At first, many of the workers had doubted her, but now, most of them had started to respect her. Clara never complained about the long hours. She never argued with anyone. She simply worked patiently and did her best every day. One afternoon, the sky above the valley began to change. Dark clouds slowly gathered over the hills. The wind grew stronger, moving across the wide fields of the ranch. One of the workers looked up at the sky and said, "Looks like a big storm is coming." Storms were not unusual in the Wild West, but they could cause problems for a ranch. Loose gates had opened. Animals could become frightened. Supplies could get damaged. Ethan Cole quickly gave instructions to the workers. "Let's secure the barns and bring the animals inside," he said calmly. Everyone immediately started moving. Some workers closed the barn doors. Others checked the fences and tied down loose equipment. Clara helped carry ropes and close smaller gates near the horse fields. The wind continued to grow stronger. Dust moved across the ground, and the sky turned a deep gray color. Soon, light rain began to fall. The workers hurried to finish their tasks before the storm became worse. Inside the barn, most of the horses were already safe. But while Clara was walking near the outer fence, she noticed something unusual. A young horse stood near a broken section of the gate. The animal looked nervous and confused. The wind and thunder had frightened it, and it had moved away from the others. Clara stopped walking. She knew the horse should not stay outside during the storm. For a moment, she looked toward the barn. The other workers were busy finishing their work. The wind blew strongly across the field. Clara took a deep breath. Then she slowly walked toward the horse. She did not run. She did not shout. Instead, she spoke softly. "It's all right," she whispered. The horse moved slightly but did not run away. Clara kept her movements calm and gentle. She held out a small piece of hay from the bundle she was carrying. The horse watched her carefully. Thunder rolled across the sky. Clara remained patient. Step by step, the horse slowly moved closer. At that moment, Ethan stepped outside the barn to check the fences. He looked across the field and noticed Clara standing near the nervous horse. For a moment, he watched quietly. The wind moved Clara's coat, and rain began to fall more heavily. But Clara stayed calm. She slowly reached the horse and gently held the rope attached to its harness. "Easy," she whispered. The horse seemed to relax. Ethan walked over to help guide the animal back toward the barn. Together, they carefully led the horse inside where the other animals were safe. Once inside, the workers closed the large barn doors. The storm continued outside, with rain tapping against the wooden walls. Everyone stood quietly for a moment. One of the workers looked at Clara. "You went out there for that horse?" he asked. Clara nodded softly. "It looked scared," she said. Another worker shook his head in amazement. That storm was getting strong. Clara simply smiled a little. "I grew up around animals," she said. "Sometimes they just need someone to stay calm." Ethan looked at the young horse, which now stood quietly in its stall. Then he looked at Clara. He remembered the first day she had arrived at the ranch. Many people had believed she was too small and too fragile for ranch life. But today, she had shown something important. She had stayed calm when others might have rushed. She had noticed something others had missed, and she had acted with quiet courage. The storm slowly passed later that evening. The rain stopped, and clouds moved away, revealing a peaceful night sky. Outside, the land of Cole Ranch looked fresh and clean under the moonlight. Inside the barn, The workers finished checking the animals before heading to their rooms. As Clara prepared to leave, Ethan spoke to her. "You did a good thing today," he said. Clara looked a little surprised. "I just helped the horse," she replied. Ethan gave a small nod. Sometimes the smallest actions make the biggest difference. Clara smiled gently. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she truly felt that she belonged there. The workers now saw her differently, not as the small girl who might fail, but as someone they could trust. And without anyone realizing it yet, that quiet moment during the storm had changed something important at Cole Ranch. Clara Whitfield was no longer just a new worker. After the storm passed, life at Cole Ranch slowly returned to normal. The sun rose over the valley the next morning, shining warmly across the wide fields. The grass looked fresh, and the air smelled clean after the rain. Workers came out of their rooms and began their daily tasks. Horses neighed softly in the barn, waiting for their morning feed. Clara Whitfield was already awake. Just like every day, she had risen before sunrise. She stepped outside and looked across the ranch. The golden light of morning spread across the land, making everything look calm and peaceful. For a moment, Clara simply stood there and smiled. When she first arrived at Willow Creek, she felt nervous and unsure. Many people believed she would not last long at the ranch. But things were different now. Clara walked toward the barn, carrying 2 small buckets of feed. As she entered, a few of the workers greeted her. "Morning, Clara," one of them said. "Morning," she replied with a friendly smile. That simple greeting may not have seemed important, but it was a big change. When Clara first arrived, many workers barely spoke to her. Now they treated her like part of the team. Inside the barn, Ethan Cole was checking the horses again. He noticed Clara placing feed in the stalls and nodded politely. "You're early again," he said. Clara laughed softly. "I like starting the day before everyone else." Ethan smiled a little. Over the past few weeks, he had seen how careful and responsible Clara was. She noticed small problems before they became big ones. And because of that, the ranch had been running more smoothly. Later that morning, Ethan gathered the workers near the barn. "We need to repair part of the north fence," he said. The storm loosened some boards. The workers began collecting tools. Clara joined them and helped carry ropes and wooden boards. The walk to the north field took a little time, but the wide view of the ranch made the journey pleasant. When they arrived, the workers began repairing the fence. Clara worked alongside them, holding boards steady and handing tools when needed. Even though the work was not easy, she stayed patient and focused. One worker looked at her and said, "You've gotten used to ranch work." Clara smiled. "I'm still learning," she said. The worker shook his head kindly. "Well, you're doing better than some of us did when we started." Everyone laughed lightly. By the afternoon, the fence was strong again. The workers rested under a large tree near the field. The breeze moved gently across the land, and the horses grazed quietly nearby. Ethan sat on a wooden post and looked across the ranch. Then he spoke. "When Clara first came here, many of us were unsure," he said calmly. The workers looked at each other. "But she has shown something important," Ethan continued. He looked at Clara. "Hard work does not always come from strength alone. Sometimes it comes from patience, care, and determination." Clara felt a little shy hearing those words. "I just try to help where I can," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "And that's exactly why you belong here." For a moment, the group sat quietly under the warm sunlight. Clara looked across the wide field again. The ranch no longer felt like a strange place. It felt like home. That evening, the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink as the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. Clara stood near the barn watching the sunset. The horses were calm, the fences were strong, and the workers were finishing their last tasks of the day. Ethan walked over and stood beside her. "It's peaceful out here," he said. Clara nodded. "It really is." For a moment, they both looked across the quiet land. Then Ethan spoke again. "When you first arrived, many people believed you were too small for ranch life." Clara smiled gently. "I remember. But they were wrong," Ethan said. Clara looked surprised. Ethan continued calmly. "This ranch did not need someone bigger or louder. It needed someone who cared about the work and about the animals. Clara felt warmth in her heart hearing those words. Sometimes people judged others by what they could see, but real strength was not always visible. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes it was patient, and sometimes it came from simply refusing to give up. As the stars slowly appeared in the darkening sky, Clara realized something important. She had come to Willow Creek searching for a place where she could work and prove herself, but she had found something even more valuable. She had found a place where she truly belonged.